Where are the destroyers?
There'll be one soon.
One.
After yesterday's losses, it's one ship on the mole at a time.
The battle is here. What the hell are they saving them for?
The next battle, the one from Britain. It's the same with the planes.
But it's right there. You can practically see
Seeing
it.
home doesn't help us get there, Colonel.
They need to send more ships. Every hour the enemy pushes closer. They've activated the small vessels pool.
Small vessels.
It's the list of civilian boats for requisition. Civilian? We need destroyers.
Small boats can load from the beach.
Not in these conditions.
But I'd rather face waves than dive bombers.
Hi everybody, I'm Peter Travers and this is Popcorn, where we tell you what's happening at the movies. And there's a movie now that I think is, well, I know it's the best movie I've seen this year so far. And it's called Dunkirk. It's directed by Christopher Nolan, my guest today, in a way that might be surprising for some of his admirers because it's a little different. It's history. But why should I talk about it when you're here, Chris? You're here. And it is for you, who people know a lot for the Dark Knight trilogy, for Inceptions and Interstellars. This is history. This is
this is
something that
real.
happened.
No, I've sort of been realizing I've spent a lot of time talking about projects I've done in science fiction, the science fiction world, or an element of fantasy, whatever, and talking about how we've tried to make them grounded and real. And so we talk about reality a lot. And of course, with this film, I suddenly turned around and realized, actually, it's the first time I really dealt with something real. Certainly the first time I've dealt with something based on real history. And that, it changes your creative process, I think, but in an exciting way, because I'm used to having to create a whole fictional world and then figure out the point of view through it.
Yeah.
And with Dunkirk, it already exists. The world of it is real and exists and just needs researching and discovering. And
It's in the history books.
it's in the history books, and it's, most importantly for me, it's in a lot of the first-hand accounts that have been collected by people who were there. And then I actually had the privilege of sitting down with some of the veterans who are still remaining, who were there, and hearing their stories directly, a lot of which worked its way into the film. So in that way, you know, I built up my understanding of the world that the movie was taking on, and then was free to sort of create my fictional characters and figure out my path through those events.
Nobody in this movie sits down and says, and here's what happened, and my mother was cruel to me. And this is why I'm acting out. There's none of that.
Yeah.
You are the screenwriter alone. Your brother Jonathan wasn't working with you on this one. He did it.
No, he's
and
too
yet
busy.
there has to be, if there's 2 pages of dialogue in the whole movie, that's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
We're watching what's happening and coming up with what we think by watching, not hearing.
Well, it's show, not tell. I'm a great fan of the silence, the great silence, von Stroheim, Murnau particularly. I also, you know, in combination with that, I decided that the way I wanted to tell this film, the tension I wanted from this story, was that of suspense. Because Dunkirk is a great ticking clock story. That's what distinguishes it from just being about a battle or a regular war film.
You even hear that clock in the Hans
Very,
Zimmer
yeah,
score.
pretty
Tick-tock,
literal about it.
tick-tock,
Exactly.
yeah, right.
It is a ticking clock movie in every sense, and it's about the 400,000 men on this beach, and the enemy are closing in on all sides, and they were faced between this choice of surrender or annihilation. And it's, you know, is there a way? Is there a third way? And the way in which that happens is what I think makes it one of the greatest sort of stories of all time. So for me, it was all about suspense, and suspense is a primarily visual language. That's why for me, Alfred Hitchcock, Clouseau, you know, these are the greats, the great creators of cinema, pure cinema, because whilst there's obviously plenty of dialogue in most Hitchcock films, it's really the visual signifiers of suspense that he knew how to do so well, and that I've tried to draw from for this film. And so you want a lack of dialogue. You also, and I was sort of hinting at this with my earlier comments, but as British people know, Dunkirk is freighted with emotion. You know, the way in which the story turns out is inherently so emotional. The last thing I felt it needed was sentimentality, you know, theatrics, the theatrics of that. And so I thought about, when you talk to people who were actually there and they're telling you their experiences, it's not about backstory. It's about in the moment. It's about meeting people right then, there, pulling together in the moment. It's about physicality. It's about literally the physics that we're facing, the water, the sand on the beach, getting from A to B. Can they find a way off this beach alive?
What made you want to tell that story, though? What was it, the motivator that
Yeah.
said, because I know you've been thinking about this for a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, like most British people, I did grow up with the story. I don't even remember the first time I was told it. But you learn it in a sort of simplified, kind of a mythical, almost a fairy tale telling, whereby, you know, every sort of fisherman jumps in his boat, crosses the channel and pulls a soldier or two off and brings them back. What happened was Emma Thomas, my wife and producer, and myself, we helped a friend sail his small sailboat about 20 years ago across the channel to Dunkirk. We made the crossing that the civilians made at about the same time of year. And we sort of did it more or less on a whim. And it turned out to be just ridiculously challenging. It was an appalling experience. It took way longer than it should have. We were out there for about 19 hours making that crossing in very, very rough seas. The channel was extremely rough. And it actually felt, at times, life-threatening. It felt dangerous. It was not a particularly experienced sailor on open water. It felt very dangerous, and that was without people dropping bombs on us. You know, there were no U-boats around.
You're
We
just
weren't
sailing.
heading into war zone. We're just sailing. We're just having fun. And so I came away from that experience with a very different respect for the people who actually did that. It's unthinkably brave what they did. They got on their boats, they headed into a war zone across that stretch of water, and the sort of physicality, it comes back to the physics things, but the physicality, the logistics, the sort of what would have been like to actually be there was very cemented for me in that trip. And I think that was really the beginning of the notion of, well, if I ever had the chance, maybe one day, you know, try and express that in film. You know, what would it have been like to be there? Not just the history of it, not the politics of it, but the experience of it.
There's two areas that I find very distinctive in this movie about the kind of filmmaker you are. One of them is the way you deal with time in it. You know, maybe I go back to Memento, which was a really playing a game with it, but a game that made us all play the game while we were watching it.
Yeah.
But here, because Dunkirk is so much land, sea, and air, it's what's going on. We have the Germans surrounding them, and are they going to die at any minute? And yet I think you spend a week, you know, in the time frame of the movie with the young soldiers on the beach. And when are they going to get off? Can they get off? Because you can't get big ships in that harbor. You can't. They can't do it, so it's those small boats run by civilians that have to do it. And then we're basically on those boats of those civilians with Mark Rylance, his character, who's coming in with his son, trying to pick up any survivors he can to do it. And then for an hour, we're up in the plane with Tom Hardy in the Spitfire, where he's covering the beach and doing it. And nothing runs in a linear way. It's basically you're jumping back and forth in time while that's happening.
Yeah, with those storylines, as you say, there are three storylines, broadly speaking, land, sea, and air. One is a week, one is a day, one is an hour. And we sort of braid them together in a particular way. And really, the purpose of that structure was always, to me, structure always comes about as a result of trying to answer the issue of point of view. So Memento was a film told backwards because I wanted to give the audience the experience of someone who couldn't remember what had just happened. So we invert the chronology and put the audience in that place. This structure, similarly, came about as a result of saying, okay, I want to stay in the human scale for the entire film. I want to know just what they would have known. I want to see what they just would have seen, the people who were involved in the events. I don't want to cut out to politicians or to generals in rooms with big maps and symbols of forces they're pushing around.
It was a movie about war without the map falling.
Without the map
really,
falling.
it
Exactly.
always falls.
Yeah.
Somebody with a pointer is always saying, and then.
Exactly. And telling the audience things that the characters can't know. But the story of Dunkirk is a very, very big story. And so I needed to find a way to build up a set of subjective experiences that as they cross-cut, they would give the audience a better understanding of the whole. So they would be gaining some understanding of the bigger issues. So by viewing it from land, from sea, from air, the same events from different points of view, It started to build up a bigger picture of the movements of the evacuation, which are, of course, what is so amazing about the story. But hopefully never stepping outside this intensely subjective viewing that I wanted. I wanted the whole film. That's the reason it's a much shorter film than my usual films. My films have been. Because
106 minutes.
Yeah.
It's like a short for you.
It's pretty short.
Yeah.
It was a 76-page script, which is, you know, about half what I usually do. And it was, you know, very much because we wanted a level of suspense and intensity that you could only sustain for so long. And we never wanted to step outside that. So the camera is always reflecting that. So we're running along the beach with those guys, or we're on the decks of the boat, and we just went out there with the actors and a very small crew on the deck of a small boat, you know, Hoyte van Hoyte by my DP with a handheld IMAX camera, you know, braving the waves, that kind of thing. And then we managed to get those cameras into the cockpit of the Spitfire and just keep the camera
Those
right
are
there.
heavy little suckers, aren't they?
Yeah, heavy big suckers. They're massive, yeah.
How much do they weigh?
They weigh about almost 60 pounds with everything on them. And we've been working with them for some years, and Interstellar was the first time when we really broke the kind of handheld barrier. And we did it, I did it basically by hiring this very strong Dutch DP who, I told him, oh, there's no way to handhold this. And so he put handles on it and just put it on his shoulder.
Yeah, so you were daring him.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Actually, I genuinely wasn't daring him. I thought it was impossible. And we'd been working for years with these cameras, believing it to be impossible. I think we'd tried engineering solutions to how to handhold it. And I think we'd never really just sort of thought, well, what if you just sort of suck it up? And, you know, and actually, what Hoyte did develop is, you know, there's a very good dolly grip we've worked with for many years called Ryan Monroe, who he started to work, because what the dolly grip does in handheld cameras, he'll put the camera on the cameraman's shoulder and then generally sort of leave it and just mind it, you know, as the shot's going on. What he started doing is keeping his hands on there and balancing the weight for him, and kind of so the two of them would sort of dance around in this peculiar way and in that way take the weight. But that let us shoot the film in the very earthy, subjective, you know, way that we wanted, and spontaneous as well, which for a filmmaker, for directors, it's a gift to be able to be spontaneous with such an elegant and large format, but still be able to just, you know, bring the camera around it just where you want it to be and follow somebody.
Not only with the cameras, but the other thing that's so you is basically you didn't create this movie on your laptop or your smartphone.
No.
This isn't a computer. You're there on location.
Yeah. We were there, not just on location, but in the real spot, you know, on the real beach at Dunkirk. And then we had real boats. We had some of the real little ships who had made the trip in 1940. They came back. We had a couple of days of shooting the evacuation where these boats recreated their journey for us. They came over from England and recreated the journey for our cameras. And we did that on the 76th anniversary in the real place. It was a very moving thing. And then for the aerial stuff, we were determined to shoot dogfights in a way that we'd never seen before, just by getting the real planes, the real Spitfires and Messerschmitts, and figuring out how to get that camera up there, how to get the actor up there, and should have showed the audience, involved the audience in the mechanics of a dogfight, and how, frankly, how difficult it is. So my stunt coordinator, Thomas Struthers, he was an aviation enthusiast. Very early on, he came to me with this amazing suggestion of getting a hold of this Soviet-era plane called a Yak. It's built in Romania, and it's about the same size and shape as a Spitfire. So we could sort of convert it to look like a Spitfire, more or less, but it has two cockpits. And we could drill into the wings. We owned it, so it wasn't an antique, it wasn't of any value, so we could create lens mounts, have the pilot fly in the back, and have a Spitfire cockpit with the actor in, actually go up and fly with the real Spitfires and dogfight.
So the pilot's in the back, Tom Hardy is up, you know, in focus, you know, as the person who's doing it.
They could be either in the front or the back. We build it to swap it around.
I've got to bring that up because every time you're with Tom Hardy, especially in the Dark Knight Rises, you're covering his face. Is that a thing that we can barely see him?
It is a thing, and George Miller did it to him as well in between
He
those
did.
films. So I don't,
I wonder if he's getting a complex about it.
You know, he had a good sense of humor about it. Cillian Murphy, to be fair, when I called him, he did actually say to me, am I going to have to wear a bag over my head? Because I've done 3 films with him where I basically put a sack on his head.
That's right.
4 films actually, where I put a sack over his head. So the thing with Tom though is, I was so thrilled with what he did for me for the film on Dark Knight Rises, acting with just, we'd had a lot of discussions about how much of the face would be revealed, so what would he have to work with? So when we came to do this Spitfire pilot, and I looked back at the old films and I looked at the research, and we talked to Spitfire pilots and everything, and this idea that every time they would talk, they would kind of pull their mask off and, whatever, it's complete nonsense. I mean, they put this thing on, the microphone is in the mask, and there's a button on the throttle to speak. I mean, you don't take it off.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, you got goggles, you
die.
got this, you got that. You die. So what actor, what actor do I know who can convey really meaningful emotion and difficulty and dilemma with, I think one of his most interesting moments in the film is one eye that you can see. It's just like this bit. And Tom can do that. And he's just a remarkable performer.
Well, talk a little about the actors in this movie. Finn Whitehead, who is the newcomer to this, and is Tommy, is this everyman soldier.
Yeah.
You have a lot of, you even have Harry Styles. This is an interesting concept, because here's this pop idol, who people would line up to see, and he's making his debut in a movie where the part isn't huge.
Yeah.
What's your theory of casting him as opposed to actors that the audience doesn't know?
Well, I think for me, what was most important was that those guys on the beach be fresh faces, fresh to movies, be people without particular association, and people whose experience of making the film would mirror the characters to some degree. That feeling of being in at the deep end. And also that feeling that you get, I was thinking of like when Ridley Scott did his first Alien movie, and Sigourney Weaver wasn't Sigourney Weaver. Like audiences in 1979, they had no idea who was going to survive that movie. And that, obviously over time that gets lost, because Sigourney became the big star that she is through that film. But I wanted to have a face in the heart of things, Finn Whitehead's character, where you've never seen this guy before, and he's a kid, he's 18. The age being a key factor. Hollywood movies, so often it's a 30-year-old playing a 19-year-old. And when we're dealing with real life events, we're dealing with war, we're addressing how it is that we fight these wars, and we send children to go and do this. We send 18, 19, 20-year-olds, guys just starting out in life. And I wanted to cast people of that age. And that means open casting calls. That means a very old-fashioned Hollywood process of people who don't even have agents yet, people in drama schools. Tom Glynn-Carney, who plays Mark Rylance's son, he dropped out of drama school to come and do the film. That's how fresh these guys are. And at some point, Harry submitted himself to our casting director and went on tape, did an audition that was
So he wanted to be a part of it?
Yeah, he did.
Did he have his own reasons for it? Was there something in his family about...
Not specific. Not specific to Dunkirk particularly. I never really asked him, to be honest. I was just kind of pleased.
Get Harry on the phone. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. He went on tape. It was great, and we were doing this big set of auditions where we sort of workshopped the scenes and mixed and matched different guys and tried to winnow it down. And he came along for that process, and over a course of days and days, he earned his seat at the table and fit something. I'd been able to find Finn to play Tommy. I'd been able to find Peter. I'd been able to find Barry to come on, play George. But I couldn't find Alex. And I think it's one of the most, it's a small part, and we try not to oversell it, obviously, or trade on Harry's stardom too much. But I think it's one of the more important parts in the film, because I think, and he does it absolutely beautifully. It's subtle and it's restrained. It's not showboating. It's not, it's very human. But it's about human frailty, and it's a sort of, it's kind of a pivot point for the movie for me, in terms of putting our cards on the table about what are we really trying to address here about human nature, or about how people react to that survival impulse. Because ultimately the film, for me, is not a war film as much as it is a survival story. That's how I've approached it.
This is your 10th feature.
Yes.
To me, shockingly, you've never been nominated as Best Director. Does that kind of thing bother you?
No, I've been working in a pretty commercial end of things. I've been making movies for audiences, you know, and so I'm always, you know, people often ask me about that sort of stuff, and it's like, you know, it'd be thrilling to be nominated for an Oscar as a director. I mean, obviously I've grown up watching the Oscars, and I'm a member of the Academy proudly, and I have been nominated for writing, which I was very, very proud of. But at the end of the day, for me, the movies are all about the audience, and with these films I've been making, they're about reaching a wide audience, really speaking to a lot of people, and so that's really the guiding principle for me. And if that's not necessarily you know, what speaks to, you know, Oscar voters or all the rest, it's not something you can worry about. You just got to get on and do the film that you believe in.
Well, yeah, I can't just picture you at home saying, well, will this be the one? No, no. Of course it will be the one, but still, to think about that and to have that. I'm just interested in what growing, because you didn't go to film school. This isn't what you did.
I couldn't get in.
Couldn't get in. They looked at your early work and said this guy has no future.
Exactly.
No, this is all over. So were you watching other movies too?
I've always watched movies. I mean, I've always been a student of films. And I think it was Stanley Kubrick who basically said, if you want to learn how to make a film, just make a film. And that was sort of my approach. I started making films when I was 7 years old on Super 8, you know, and I never really stopped. And then my first feature, Following, you know, was made on 16mm with friends who just did it on the weekends and put it together.
Pretty cheap.
Very cheap. I mean, yeah, all told about $6,000. So
yeah, that
was very, very cheap.
What were those movies that had an impact on you growing up?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about raw sort of cinematic impact, you know, I always have to talk about George Lucas's first Star Wars. I was 7 years old when it came out. Anybody my age, that's a seminal film. It's just the film that shows you the possibilities of cinema. The success of that was followed about a year later by a re-release of Kubrick's 2001. And my dad took me to see that on a huge screen in Leicester Square in London when I was 7 years old still, I think, almost 8. And that made an incredible impression on me as well. Just that feeling of how the screen can just be a portal to another dimension. I mean, just be this whole other world or set of worlds.
Well, I have to say goodbye to you. You've done this show before and it didn't work out, but we always end in song. And now, this is a big deal for me because Christian Bale has said to me, and he put 50 of his hard-earned dollars up in it. He said, if you can even get Chris Nolan to hum, you have my 50. It's yours. So just out of respect and for my $50 being taken from Christian Bale, is there part of Hans Zimmer's scores that he's done for you since you started making movies practically, that you can give me of a theme that were in the movies without singing an actual song? I'm sure you serenaded your 4 children.
Well, you know, to be honest, I wouldn't do that to Christian. He needs to keep his 50.
Oh.
But I can play the ticking on my watch that's
Can you?
at the heart of
Let's just
the score.
pause and we'll do it
You
in
need
post.
a very big, you need a very, exactly.
Here it is. Can we
we'll
actually
pretend that's
hear
the
it?
watch. It actually was a pocket watch that I recorded, and I gave Hans a recording and said,
Really,
build
that's
the tracks
it.
out of that. Yeah.
And you think Christian needs his 50, you know,
Well, you know,
really.
I'm not going to do that to a friend.
Okay, Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you.